Well, let's jump right into Romans chapter 8. Let me see if I can get this little board up here. I want to draw a little something. Write a little something. I'm not going to draw a stick man today, don't worry. And so Romans, we talked about how chapter 6, 7, and 8, they kind of fit together, and that what Paul is doing and what Paul is attempting to do is Paul's actually rehearsing the story of the people of God. And it's just this awesome thing. And so I just want to remind us of it because today is really, really prevalent. So Romans 6 is this understanding of passing through the Red Sea. Paul talks a lot about baptism, that when you go through the waters, God's grace washes over us. And so it's this understanding of Exodus and leaving this old life and being a part of the baptism of God and being baptized into something new. And then we looked at Romans 7, is this, can't spell. Romans 7 is this all about the law. And so it's kind of the journey of the people of God to Mount Sinai. And that is probably not spelled right, but just pretend it says Sinai, and English wasn't my best subject. In the South, English is nobody's good subject. So it's the law, and so Paul goes in Romans 7, talks about the law, the whole chapter, that the law can't set us free. It's God's Spirit that sets us free, but the law isn't bad. The law is a good thing because it helps us understand who God wants us to be. And then Romans 8, which is we're in through this whole season of Lent, is this understanding of the journey in the wilderness, and then eventually the promised land that God has given to us. And so this is kind of what we're talking about, and being led through the wilderness and being led into all the things that God has for us in the future. And oh man, you got to come next week. I almost preached next week's sermon today, but I'm not going to. It's so awesome. It's so exciting. And I'm not quite ready, but so there's this new kind of life. And there's a life that leads to there's a life that leads to life, and there's a life that leads to death. There's a life that leads to life now and later, and there's a life that leads to death now and later as well, both now and for eternity. So we're just going to work through these verses together, just kind of systematically here, and see what God might want to say. So let's look at verse number 12 again of Romans chapter 8. Therefore, brothers and sisters, we have an obligation, but it is not to the sinful nature to live according to it. Now, this word obligation, we have an obligation, is actually the Greek word for debt. We have a debt. We owe a debt that to somebody and to something or to someone. And so what is that debt? What is the debt that we owe? The obligation, not to the flesh, but to the Spirit. What does that debt look like? John Stott says it like this: it is not now to share the gospel with the world, although we should do that, but to live a righteous life. Our obligation is to the Spirit to live according to His desires and His dictates. And there's a story, and we've talked about it before, but man, it's just such a good story. It's this story called Les Miserables. I never know if you pronounce the ES at the end, but I don't think you do. And it's this French story, and it's a best-selling book, but the character Jean Valjean, which is fun to say, you should try it sometime. He was released from prison, and he'd been in prison for a long time for robbery and thievery. And when he gets out, he has nowhere to go, and so this bishop takes him in. Bishop Myriel takes him in, and in the middle of the night, Jean Valjean, I'm going to say it a few more times just because it's that fun, and Jean Valjean takes the silverware from the priest, from the church. He steals from the church, and he runs. Well, the police capture him, and they take him back, and you would think this is when the bishop is really going to give it to him, and the bishop looks and says, no, it was a gift. It's a gift. In fact, you forgot these 2 candlesticks as well, and gives them 2 candlesticks. The police accept the story, and the bishop looks at Jean Valjean and says, use this silver to make an honest man of yourself. He was given something that he couldn't give himself, grace, and now he was in debt. Well, the story goes that as immediately he leaves, and the next day I think he steals from this little kid, but as soon as he does it, he remembers what the bishop did for him. And he's immediately regretful for what he did, and he goes all over the city trying to find this young boy that he's stolen from. But because from that point forward, he chose to make a difference. In fact, he adopted a little girl who had no chance to make it on her own. because of God's love for us, as we studied earlier. Even while we were still sinners, when we were still enemies of the cross, Christ died for us. And because of that love, because he loved us, we have an obligation, we have a debt, not to the flesh and to live according to that, but to live according to the Spirit. Not to live to the flesh because it brings death, but to live for the Spirit because he has given us life. Verse 13. For if you live according to the sinful nature, you will die. But if you live by the Spirit, you will put to death the misdeeds of the body, and you will live. You will put to death the misdeeds of the body. Now, if you live in the flesh, if you live for the flesh, and once again, this isn't this material, it's this understanding of how the world works and what it looks like, and the world is on a course that leads to destruction. Come back next week. You got to come back next week. But the world is leading into this flesh, this understanding of what that looks like. And so it's not that my material flesh is bad. God created it, and what God creates is a good thing. But if there's this nature, this understanding of life is leading towards destruction. And if you live that way, I'm just going to promise you. You ready for this? Your life will be a mess. You will tell stories that maybe aren't true. And then you'll tell another person a different story. And then you'll have to remember what you told this person, because you got to cover yourself and you got to make sure that your life is okay for you. And so it's all about covering and making sure that you have what you need. And so your relationships will be broken, and internally you will be a mess. You'll get your feelings hurt. You will be upset with someone for what they did to you, or maybe what they did not do. You will be upset with your life, period, because there's something that doesn't work in your life. It's not the way that it was intended to be, and you will be disappointed. You will be disappointed. And so the idea of what we do with our lives has got to be such a huge deal for Paul. In fact, a lot of quotes again this morning. John Stott says this. Jesus said, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Since Romans compelled a condemned criminal to carry his cross to the site of crucifixion, to carry our cross is symbolic of following Jesus to the place of execution. And what we are to put to death there, Paul explains, is the misdeeds of the body. That is, every use of our body, our eyes, ears, mouth, hands, or feet, which serves ourselves instead of God and other people. Anything that is about self, I've got to let that die at the execution place, the cross, so that my life, so anything, my eyes, ears, mouth, hands, feet, anything that would be self-serving, I've got to get rid of it so that I can serve God with everything and love my neighbor as myself. So is this just trying to say, you know what, just ignore all those bad things. Just ignore all those bad things. Whatever makes you upset, or just ignore it. And is this just trying to sweep things under the rug? Like I just got to just ignore those things? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Once again, John Stott says this. This is not an unhealthy form of repression, pretending that evil does not exist in us and refusing to face it. It is the opposite. We have to pull it out, look at it, denounce it, and hate it for what it is. When you have really dealt with it, or as Jesus graphically expressed it, we must gouge out our offending eye and cut off our offending hand or foot. That is, if temptation comes to us through what we see, handle, or visit, then we must be ruthless and not looking, not touching, not going, and so in controlling the very approaches of our sin. My dad used to say something, and maybe you said this too, I don't know. I say it every now and then, and it's one of those things like, I'll never say that when I get older, and I find myself saying it. But my dad, I'd go to my dad, and I'd say, hey, Dad, my arm hurts when I do this. You know what he'd say? Don't do it. Thanks. Don't do it. Yeah, but Dad, what? Well, just don't do that. Okay. And I've said that before, I think. It's like an athlete training for a competition. It's not a good idea if you're about to run a marathon to drink a lot of Coca-Cola Classic or sweet tea. It's just not a good idea because it's not going to get you to do what you want to do. You have to set up your life, and when you're training and doing certain things, you have to prepare for that, or you have to get rid of things in your life that will allow you to then do the thing that you were trying to accomplish. You don't eat certain things. You don't go you go to bed early at night when it's race day the next day because you got to have a lot of rest. You ready to get pretty hard? So maybe you're here and you say, man, I can't help but look at pornography late at night when I get on my computer. And don't get on your computer late at night. Maybe you say, man, I think really badly about people after I get on Facebook. Maybe you need to get off Facebook. Maybe you say, I can't feel this way when this happens. Maybe you don't need to do that then. Maybe you say, man, I can't help but hate Democrats after I watch Fox News. Maybe you shouldn't watch Fox News. We live life and we put ourselves in situations that may help us get closer to God. They actually help us get further away from Him. Yeah, Dad, my arm hurts me. Then don't do it. Look at what it is. See what causes you to feel that way about certain people. See what causes you to have that attitude. See what it causes you to do that and say, you know what, that, if for me, causes me to have negative thoughts or negative feelings or to surrender to sin. And you know what? If I'm going to be everything that God's calling me to be, I'm just not going to do it anymore. Facebook is not that important. It's not worth your soul. It's not worth your life to continually get upset. It's like, you know what? I'm out. Check you later. Check you later. This is fun. I think sometimes we feel like we have to make decisions that are good for the rest of our lives rather than just for the present moment. Rather than just for the present moment. Well, let's look at Luke chapter 9. What does this life look like? Is this a one-time deal? Luke chapter 9. We'll start reading at verse number 23. Then Jesus said to them all, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross. And then what's the next word? Daily, and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. What good is it for you to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit your very soul? Like, your decision may not just be one night that you get off the computer. It may be every night, daily. Your decision may not be, well, I'm just going to not look at Facebook this time. It may be daily. That it's not just like, okay, I didn't do it here, so I must be good for the rest of my life. It's daily. Oh my goodness, I'm about to share a quote with you that may be my favorite John Wesley quote ever. You ready for this? This is in a plain account of Christian perfection, the book he wrote that explained the doctrine of sanctification to its T. And it's funny because he has this argument with himself through the whole thing. But listen to this quote. Are you ready for this? You're not ready for this. You ready for this? Oh my goodness, listen to this. John Wesley, our homeboy, John Wesley, the holiest of people, still need Christ as their prophet, as the light of the world. For he does not give them light, but from moment to moment. The instant he withdraws, all is darkness. They still need Christ as their king, for God does not give them a stock of holiness. But unless they receive a supply every moment, nothing but unholiness would remain. They still need Christ as their priest to make an atonement for their holy things. Even, listen to this, even perfect holiness is acceptable to God only through Jesus Christ. But if I should be left to myself, I should be nothing but sin, darkness, hell. Even John Wesley says it's this moment by moment, day by day, week by week, life by life. It's not something that happens and you're like, woo, I got all the holiness I need. John's like, no. It's this moment by moment, and any moment that we walk away from it, we can fall back into the sin that so easily entangles us. I take up my cross daily. And if there are things that I do in my life that cause me to live for the flesh and to live for self and to live to that understanding, I've got to get rid of it. I've got to crucify it. I've got to take it to the cross so that Jesus can then put himself and his spirit in me back to Romans chapter 8. Let's read that verse 13 again. For if you live according to the sinful nature, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the misdeeds of the body, listen to this, you will live. Oh, come on, people. That's good news, isn't it? If you put to death by the Spirit all those things that bring death, the deeds of the body, you will live. What a promise. What a promise. We think, oh, but I got to give Facebook up. Yeah, but you can have life. You mean I can't watch that news channel anymore? Yeah, but you're going to get life. Like you've never experienced it before. I mean, I can't get on the computer. I know it may be difficult and you're going to sacrifice, but I promise you what you get in return is life. To the full, everything that you are. So when Jesus says gouge out the eye, did he really literally mean gouge out our eye? I don't think so, because we all have two eyes. When he said cut off your hand, I think we all, he's talking about getting rid of things in your life that lead you to the life of death rather than the life in the Spirit. Verse number 14. For those who are led by the Spirit of God are the children of God. The Spirit you received does not make you slaves so that you live in fear again, but rather the Spirit you received brought about your adoption to the sonship, and by him we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we are God's children, that if we are children, then we are heirs, heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ, if indeed we share in his sufferings, in order that we may also share in his story. Led by the Spirit. If you are led by the Spirit, you need to be led by the Spirit. Now, what is this in reference to? Wilderness. Next slide. God in the wilderness, led by a cloud by day. Next slide. The pillar of fire by night. If you go to the next slide, they're both on the same. Look at that. Isn't that awesome? Wow. The crowd goes wild. So just as God led the people, the children of Israel, in the wilderness by a cloud and by fire, what Jesus is saying is, if you will let me, my Spirit will lead you through the wilderness. My Spirit will lead you along the way about how you should do, or who you should be, and how you should act, and what you should do. And so just as he led the people of God in the wilderness, he will lead us. His Spirit will lead us along life's journey. Next slide, NT right. These images are replaced, the cloud and the fire, with now being led by the Spirit, who now does for God's people that which the tabernacling presence of God did in the wilderness, assuring them of divine adoption and leading them forward to their inheritance. I love this next quote, and then we're going to talk about this next quote. This is once again NT right. We did not receive, says Paul, a spirit of slavery. That would lead us back again into fear. In other words, the pillar of cloud and the fire is not leading you back to Egypt. It would be silly if they get in the wilderness and they're following this cloud around and it takes them back to Egypt. That would be like, really? You brought us out to go back in? You don't want to go back to slavery. Remember how bad it was? They would beat you. Remember when you had to meet a certain quota of bricks for the Pharaoh to be happy with you? And if you didn't, then you would get beaten, and then they would take your straw away to make bricks, and it would be harder. Remember the beatings, the labor, the long days, the sleepless nights, the wondering if God would ever deliver you. He doesn't lead you out of slavery. He doesn't lead you into the life that he has for you so that you can go back to it. He leads you to be the person and the people that he's called you to be. And if you're truly following the Spirit, I promise you, he's not going to lead you back to the things that's going to enslave you. If you're truly following after the Spirit, he's not going to take you back to the place where you have to lie to get around all these things. He's not going to take you back to the place where you have this guilt because you can't quit doing this thing. He's not going to take you to a place where you hate people, you have ill thought towards people. He's always going to take you to life. Always going to take you to life. The question is, will we follow? He will always lead us to the path towards life, never towards destruction. It boggles my mind when people are like, well, God told me to do that. No, he didn't. He didn't. He told me to be mean to that. No, he didn't. He never leads us to destruction, always to life. So if you're following the Spirit, you will not be a slave. If you're following the Spirit and letting him lead, he is leading you towards life and life abundantly. Oh, that's good. Paul uses this word adoption. Now, for us, I know several of us have adopted children, and it's a big deal, man. It's a big deal. And in the Roman culture, it was even a bigger deal. The term adoption is somewhat, we hear it, and it has one connotation, but in Roman, in the first century in Rome, an adopted son was a son deliberately chosen by his adoptive father to perpetuate his name and inherit his estate. He was not inferior in status to a son born in the ordinary course of nature and might well, this is crazy, enjoy the father's affection more fully than the child that the father produced himself. And carry on the father's character more worthily. So I could have Caleb and Cully, and I'm like, man, they're no good scumbags. You know what I'm saying? Not that you are, son. I love you. I could go pick a son that I think would carry on my tradition more better, and I could look at Caleb and Cully and be like, sorry, dude, this guy's getting everything. So when God says he adopts us, not anything we did. He chose us. He chose us to be his kids. It's not anything that we were great or grand or had anything to say, hey, look at this, I can do a little dance, or I can play the guitar. None of that made any difference whatsoever. He chose us because he loved us. And he has given us everything. It says we are co-heirs with Jesus. We are co-partners with Jesus. And so we have been brought into this inheritance not because of what we did, but he looks at us and says, I am giving you everything. And just like in the Roman culture, it has nothing to do with who the other kids are. God chooses you. God chooses you. Huge. Next slide, Dr. Greathouse says this, that God's adopted children are his heirs, indeed co-heirs with Christ, is a reminder that we have no right to our own status. We are children solely because of the Father's decision through an act of sheer grace. I just want to hit on this last phrase in the verse number 17. If we could look at it one more time, verse 17. Now, if we are children, then we are heirs, heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ. Now listen to this. If indeed we share in his sufferings, in order that we may also share in his glory. If indeed we share in his sufferings, in order that we may also share in his glory. Scripture is very clear, and it has a strong emphasis on the principle that glory only comes through suffering. Romans, flip over to chapter 5. Starting in verse 1, therefore, since we have been justified through faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have gained access by faith into this grace in which we now stand. And we boast in the hope of glory of God. Not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, character, hope. And hope does not put us to shame because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. We share and we glory in our sufferings. Turn over to Philippians chapter 3. Verse number 10. I want to know Christ, yes, to know the power of his resurrection and participation in his sufferings, becoming like him in his death, and so somehow attaining to the resurrection from the dead. And then look at 1 Peter chapter 4. Verse number 13, but rejoice, this is good, inasmuch as you participate in the sufferings of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed when his glory is revealed. The essence of discipleship is union with Christ, and this means identification with him both in his sufferings and his glory. I feel like I'm beating a dead horse, but this is so true. Be resurrected unless something dies. It's physically impossible. We love the resurrection talk, but guess what? The journey to resurrection begins with a death. And if there are things in my life that cause me to not be who God's called me to be, I've got to let those things be crucified so that I can then be resurrected with who Jesus is. Is it painful? Yeah. Hurts. I mean, just ask Jesus how much it hurt. Hurts. It can be a painful process. But if we are going to be led by the Spirit, the way that we are led by the Spirit, it goes through the cross so that we can then be resurrected into the newness that God has for us. If we were to survey your life, if we were just to take some time and look at all the things you do throughout the week, if we were to look at, this would be even more scary, but if we could survey your mind and how you think about people and how you view people and the thoughts you have about them, because Jesus said, you've heard it said, don't murder, but I tell you, don't even be angry. Jesus said, don't commit adultery, or you've heard it said, don't commit adultery, but I tell you, don't even lust. You've heard it said, don't even hate your enemy. I wonder if we could just take a survey. What are things in your life that don't lead the Spirit that aren't being led by the Spirit, but are led by the sinful flesh? What are things in your life that lead more to death of others, of your inner self, than they do to life? And as John Wesley said, this isn't just for people who aren't Christian. I need it moment by moment, day by day, sometimes hour by hour. So this isn't like where Christians can be like, I'm glad I said the prayer. This is for us to search. This is for us to say, God, if there's anything in me that causes me to lead down the life of death to destruction, and it's not the life of death that I'm crucifying it, but it's a life that leads to death now and forever. Rather than life that it's by the Spirit where I put to death all those things of selfishness and pride and envy and jealousy and hatred and anger and bitterness and having this control all the time about my life and what it looks like. There's anything, Facebook, that's just a stupid example, or Twitter, or as a news channel. I mean, there's so many things, or your computer, or the people at your work and talking behind their back. I mean, if there's anything in your life that would cause you to have ill towards anybody, we've got to put it to death. We've got to name it, and we got to look at it in the face and say, you will no longer have control over my life. I'm going to participate in the sufferings with Jesus so that I can then be resurrected with him. And I'm going to take up my cross daily. Not just Sunday morning at 10:30. Oh, it's a great time. But guess what? Tomorrow morning, alarm clock goes off. Is this going to be how I live? Or am I going to live for myself? You know what? This just came to me, which could be a scary thought. I think our families might be a little better if we were to do this. I think our marriages might be a little better if we had this self-serving attitude. I know mine would. I'll just put it out there. I know mine would. And And we are at our best when that is our mantra. But when I get selfish, because Tara never gets selfish, and please tell her I said that, it's when things tend to break down between us. I think our world would be a better place. I think our world would be a better place.